The people thought he was just the small-town doctor, ordinary, quiet, simple. But when the outbreak began, and the decisions he made shocked even the World Health Organization. Because Dr. James Crawford was anything but ordinary doctor. James Crawford had been living quietly in Millbrook, Ontario for 7 years, population 3,200, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where the biggest excitement was the annual Harvest Festival, and where a traffic jam meant 2 cars at the stop sign. His clinic sat on Maple Street, sandwiched between Henderson's Hardware and Sarah's Bakery. A modest building with faded blue paint and a creaky front door that announced every visitor. James preferred it that way, quiet, predictable, safe. Every morning at 7 a.m. sharp, James would unlock his clinic, brew coffee in his small office, and review the day's appointments. Mrs. Patterson's arthritis, young Tommy's soccer injury, Mr. Webber's blood pressure check, simple ailments for simple people in a simple town. The locals had accepted him easily enough. A British doctor who'd moved to their little Canadian town, claiming he wanted a slower pace of life. His soft London accent charmed the elderly ladies, and his gentle bedside manner won over even the most sceptical farmers. But if they'd looked closer, really looked, they might have noticed things. The way his hands never trembled, even during the most complex procedures. How he could diagnose rare conditions with just a glance. The collection of medical journals in languages most had never heard of, stacked high in his office. They might have wondered why a man in his early 50s would abandon what was clearly a brilliant career to treat common colds and scraped knees. Why he sometimes stared out his window with the look of someone carrying invisible weight. But Millbrook wasn't the kind of place where people pried. They were grateful to have any doctor at all, let alone one as skilled and kind as Doctor. Crawford James liked it that way. For 7 years, he'd successfully buried Dr. James Crawford, former chief epidemiologist of the World Health Organization, former crisis response specialist, well, that was the past he'd come here to forget. It started on a Tuesday in late September. James was examining Mrs. Chen's persistent cough when his phone rang. Not his clinic line, his personal cell. The number made his blood run cold. Dr. Crawford. The voice was crisp, professional, familiar. This is Director Sarah Williams, True Emergency Response. James stepped into his private office, closing the door behind him. His hands, those steady hands that never shook, began to tremble slightly. Sarah, he said quietly, it's been 7 years. What do you want? We need you, James. There's a situation developing in northern Ontario, 3 towns, including yours. We've identified a potential outbreak, something we've never seen before. James sank into his chair. Through his window he could see old Mr. Peterson walking his dog, completely oblivious to the conversation that might change everything. I'm retired, Sarah. I'm just a small-town doctor now. James, listen to me. We've lost contact with Cedarville. That's 50 kilometres from you. Berkston is reporting a 23% mortality rate in the last 48 hours. And we're getting reports from Millbrook itself. His heart stopped. What reports? Respiratory symptoms, rapid onset. But here's the thing, James. The pattern doesn't match anything in our database. We need someone who's seen this before, someone with your particular experience. James closed his eyes. The weight he'd been carrying for 7 years suddenly felt heavier. What makes you think I've seen this before? Because 3 months ago, our AI flagged similar patterns from archived reports. Reports from South Sudan, 2009. Reports signed by you, James, right before you disappeared. That night, James sat in his small apartment above the clinic, staring at files he'd hoped never to open again. The South Sudan incident, the one that had ended his career, the one that had driven him to this small Canadian town where nobody asked questions. 201 dead. An entire refugee camp wiped out because he'd made the wrong call, because he'd trusted the wrong data, because sometimes even the best minds in the world get it catastrophically wrong. He'd been the golden boy of the WHO back then, the youngest chief epidemiologist in the organization's history, the man they called when the impossible became reality, until South Sudan, until 201 people died because of his hubris. Now, Sarah was asking him to do it again, to trust his judgment when that judgment had failed so spectacularly before. His phone buzzed, a text from Dr. Martinez at the hospital in Thunder Bay. James, we're seeing something strange here. Patients from your area. Can you call me? Another buzz. This time from Mayor Richardson. Doc, got a few folks feeling under the weather. What happened next would be studied in medical schools for decades to come. Dr. James Crawford, not the small-town doctor, but the former WHO crisis specialist, implemented a response protocol that was both brilliant and unprecedented. First, he established a complete quarantine of Millbrook, not the kind imposed by outside authorities, but a voluntary one, organized by the community itself. He explained the science, the risks, and the necessity, and amazingly, people listened. Second, he turned the community centre into a treatment facility, using knowledge gained from decades of field experience in the world's most remote and dangerous places. He created isolation protocols using materials from Henderson's hardware. He organised food distribution through Sarah's bakery. He turned a small Canadian town into a model of crisis response. Third, he did something that shocked the WHO officials who were rushing to the scene. He began treating the outbreak with a combination therapy that didn't exist in any manual. A treatment he'd developed in his mind during 7 years of guilt and reflection, wondering what he could have done differently in South Sudan. The results were immediate and dramatic. While Cedarville and Berkston struggled with mortality rates above 20%, Millbrook's rate dropped to less than 3%. The town that should have been hit hardest became a beacon of hope. When the WHO team finally arrived, led by Director Sarah Williams herself, they found something impossible. A small town that had essentially cured itself under the guidance of a doctor they thought had disappeared from the world. James, Sarah said as they stood in the makeshift treatment centre, watching Millbrook's residents care for each other with military precision. How did you know? James was quiet for a long moment, watching Mrs. Patterson help distribute meals to quarantined families. Because I never stopped being who I was, Sarah. I just stopped believing I deserved to use what I knew. The South Sudan treatment, this combination therapy, you've been working on it all these years. Every night for 7 years. I've run through that outbreak thousands of times in my mind. Every decision, every protocol, every life lost. I knew what I should have done. I just never thought I'd get the chance to prove it. Sarah looked around the centre. You saved this town, James. Hell, you probably saved the region. This outbreak was spreading fast. If it had reached Toronto, Montreal. I didn't save anyone, James said firmly. This community saved itself. I just gave them the tools. He was right in a way. The response had only worked because Millbrook was the kind of place where neighbours trusted each other, where people pulled together in crisis, where a doctor's word still meant something. But Sarah knew better. She'd spent 20 years in crisis response, and she'd never seen anything like what James had accomplished. The combination of advanced epidemiological knowledge, improvised field medicine, and community organisation was nothing short of miraculous. The world needs to know about this, she said. This response protocol, it could change everything. James shook his head. The world has what it needs. The protocols are all documented. Take them, study them, improve them. But I'm staying here. James, 7 years ago, I thought I was indispensable, that the world needed Dr. James Crawford, WHO specialist. That hubris killed 201 people. Today, I learned something different. I learned that sometimes the best way to serve the world is to serve your community. And this is my community now. 6 months later, the Millbrook Protocol had been adopted by health organizations worldwide. The small-town response that had emerged from one man's guilt and redemption became the gold standard for rural outbreak management. Dr. James Crawford returned to his quiet practice on Maple Street. He still saw Mrs. Patterson for her arthritis, still treated Tommy's sports injuries, still monitored Mr. Webber's blood pressure. But something had changed. The weight he'd carried for 7 years was lighter now. Not gone, it would never be completely gone, but balanced somehow by the knowledge that when his community needed him most, he'd found a way to be worthy of their trust. The people of Millbrook never treated him differently. They still called him simply Doc. They still brought him cookies at Christmas and invited him to barbecues and asked his advice on everything from medical concerns to garden problems. But sometimes, when international health officials visited to study the Millbrook response, when medical students came to interview the man who'd turned a small town into a case study in crisis management, the townspeople would smile with quiet pride. Their small-town doctor wasn't so small after all.